Hello, a very good afternoon to all. Welcome to this session of Samvaad talk this Monday afternoon. It is my privilege to introduce the speaker of today's session, Professor Chandrashekar Ramanathan, as we know him popularly as Professor RC. He has been a faculty member of IIIT for over 18 years. He comes with a software development background, having spent over 10 years in the industry in various capacities. At IIIT, his teaching interests are in the areas of data science and software engineering. On the research front, he heads the MINRO Center and also the CTRI DG Software Center, both funded by Government of Karnataka. In data science, his primary research interest lies in the area of information convergence, which is the ability to model, store, and reason with information expressed in multiple heterogeneous data models. In software engineering, his interest lies in model-driven architecture, where the focus is not just on writing code or creating software, but instead use reusable models as the building blocks for creating software. He has received accolades from various forums as one of the top data science academicians of the country. At IIIT-Bangalore, he also holds the administrative position of Dean of Academics, holding the overall responsibility for all the degree programs and the CPE programs offered by IIIT-Bangalore. Welcome to the session, Professor RC. We look forward to your talk.
Thank you, Dr. Ramesh, for the generous introduction, and very good afternoon to all of you. So this talk is essentially a little bit of an overlap between the areas of software engineering and data science, both of which I am interested in. And you can add the third new element to my interest, which is the societal aspects of it, which is where the ethics comes in as well. So I will, this is the outline of my talk. In the first part, I will try to give the motivation for the work that we have done. To that extent, you have to bear with me for giving a little bit of a background on software engineering and software design. It's a quick 15-20 minute intro to various approaches to designing software. And yeah, within that, there is a specific design strategy called configuration or customization strategy. And why is it important, and what is the context for responsible software, and so on. And then we will jump into the main part of the talk, which is the responsible software with GRAILS. GRAILS is a little bit of a wordplay on guardrails. We keep hearing the term guardrails in the context of AI quite a bit. So yeah, GRAILS, Holy Grail, so all of that. So that's what it is. So I'll talk about the various dimensions of ethics and what is the, how does the GRAILS framework attempt to address this issue. A quick look at the proof of concept, and more importantly, I am looking forward to a bit of Samvaad towards the end, because it turns out that I don't have, I couldn't find answers to many of the challenges we might be facing in this area. So let's begin with the big question. So we keep hearing the terms, responsible AI. So whose responsibility is it responsible AI? Right? So we can say that users of the AI system must use the AI systems in a responsible manner. So which means that if there is a specific capability that the AI software is giving you, you should not misuse it, right? So we should not misuse it to do something wrong. So that is where the users of the AI system have to be responsible. Of course, the builders of the AI models themselves have to be responsible, which means that they don't incorporate anything in the model which is not supposed to be there in the model, and which is possibly subject to exploitation in any way by the users of the AI systems, right? So that is where, to me, we can even put a degree of rating on where is the highest level of responsibility, but we'll just say that yes, definitely builders of AI models need to be responsible. And the builders of the AI software. Okay, so this is where I'm slightly distinguishing between the builders of the AI models and the builders of the AI software. So no. For example, if the AI models are there already, right? So all these large language models, different kinds of models that are there. So if you are building the software to do specific things which are not considered to be responsible, so those are the kind of applications. No, you talk about the applications. That is what I mean with the builders of the AI software, right? So for example, if we have lots of image builders that are out there. Now there is an AI model which has got the ability to replace one face with another face very seamlessly and so on. That is more of the model's capabilities. But then if I am creating an application to misuse that particular feature, then that is where the builders of the AI software need to be responsible as well. And on top of it, there is also a lot of talk about the lawmakers, the regulatory authorities, and so on. So now there also a lot of people are trying to put responsibility on them as well. So if you want responsible software, so the idea is that if you have very strong laws and regulations, then it will automatically ensure in some way that none of those other things will behave irresponsibly. Okay, so my focus is on builders of the AI software, right? So in fact, you will notice that soon I will move away from AI software. I will say broadly builders of software in general, because I have focused my talk not just on responsible AI, but responsible software in general, because it turns out that even without using AI, I can create irresponsible software, right? Which means that we'll look at the definition of responsible software in a minute, but the broad focus is, so for example, the GRAILS is a software framework that is expected to assist developers of software. So that's what my focus is going to be. So responsible software, the broadly accepted definition, I'll just read out the main keywords. So it is the responsible software refers to the software that is designed, developed, and maintained in ways that promote ethical integrity, transparency, sustainability, safety, and societal well-being, ensuring accountability for both intended and unintended consequences. So I've highlighted in bold some of the very important terms. Yes, it is, we can argue that probably we need to add more such terms to the definition, but you broadly get the idea, right? So that is what we are looking at, what is responsible software. And my attempt is to say that can we create some beyond guidelines. So normally what happens is when we if we are into large scale software development, we would understand the way it works is that the coders will definitely do the coding, but if you want to prevent people, if you want the coders to follow certain standards and things like that, all of it is given as guidelines. And the guidelines are available in the form of web pages or even documents, and you only hope and pray that they will read those things when developing the software. So here what we are saying is beyond handing them the DPDP book and then say that develop software which by which you are compliant with this, can we create a framework that will help the programmers develop software which is compliant? I also now want to introduce this term called flexible software, and I will connect it. I will connect the term flexible software with with responsible software subsequently. So flexible software is the ability of the software to behave differently in different environments. But the key word here is with no or minimal changes to the code. Right, so that is purely a software engineering way of looking at what is flexible software. So if I have a software which I have created and using it in one particular context, one particular environment, how easy is it to take the same piece of software and make it work in a different environment, right? The classic example, you think of it like a leave management system. So if we have created a leave management system and we are using the leave management system in IIIT-B, how easy is it to take the leave management system and take it and use it in Infosys with no code changes? So that is when we attribute this particular property or characteristic called it that software is flexible. So when we talk about what are the key characteristics of flexible software, it has to be adaptable. It has to be adaptable from this environment to that environment and so on. And it has to be modular, because one of the important properties of being flexible is that we are not saying without code change, but we are not saying without changes, which means that if it is modular enough, I should be able to substitute, take out one with something else, right? So no, this is something which we routinely find in our own IIIT systems, like say MOSIP, right? So why do we call it as modular open source identity platform? So people can replace one with others, right? Somebody who does not want thumb biometrics, they want to replace it with iris and so on, it becomes easier. So that is what adds flexibility to the software. Scalability as well. So that is also another aspect that I want to bring in when we talk about flexibility. So how easy is it for if you take the same leave management system, so we have what? At most 50 faculty members and probably 200, 300 staff, right? But then if you walk across and say that the same software should be able to work in an organization like Infosys, which has got lakhs of users, so what does it take to make the same software work with no code change? So that keeps coming back as the recurring theme for for flexibility. And finally, extensibility, the ability to add new capabilities, and these are all the factors of flexible software. Now, how can you achieve flexible software in software engineering in general, right? So broadly, I'm going to say 3 ways of achieving it, right? So one is the more very, very mundane way of doing it, wherein so there is some, because at the end of the day, flexibility means how does it work, how does it behave, how does it react to any changes that are required. So there is some user or business where there is a change request that comes up. So it typically goes to the designer, and the designer, and the coders, they work with the entire code base. So they work on it. But the point is, no, I have shown the entire code base. What it means is the footprint of change is the entire code base. I may be changing only 10 lines of code, 15 lines of code, but at the end of the day, entire code base is exposed. Which means that when I am touching so it has to be tested. The whole thing has to be tested. So right, because there are classic stories which says that you introduce some change and then something that was already working breaks down. So you say do some amount of testing, and eventually we should not forget that it doesn't stop there. So you have to bring in the sysadmin people, right? So sysadmin is responsible for reinstalling the modified software. And guess what? To reinstall the modified software, I have to bring the system down, right? So there is no tremendous amount of disruption that goes on, right? So when we talk about this, typically this code change, flexibility through code change is the only option when you talk about bespoke software. Again, a small terminology introduction here. So when you talk about software, we talk about COTS, off-the-shelf, commercial off-the-shelf products, or bespoke, which means that bespoke is a software which is developed specifically for one organization, for one particular requirement, and so on, right? So which is a very specifically created software. And so when we want to make specific changes to that particular software, the activities include, I need to change the code, I need to get in, and right, so we have to do some amount of testing. And in software testing, we call this limited amount of testing is called regression testing as opposed to exhaustive testing. So in typically for changes, you cannot afford to do exhaustive testing all over again. So you do some selected limited testing, which is called as the regression testing. And then we have to do the deployment, right? So which means with minimal amount of downtime and so on. So what are the benefits? Well, there is no other choice. Especially when you're talking about a bespoke software, there is absolutely no other way but than to work on that one. And so I will not spend too much time talking about this. This is definitely not good, right? But then let us go through a definitely much better and very well practiced approach called flexibility through customization. Okay, so here what happens is, so we have a software and there is the same kind of change request comes, and what happens is the designer or the coder, now the software code base itself is divided into two parts. One is called as the core software and the other is called custom code. So the core software, you engineer the core software in such a way that you put in enough hooks inside it, so that, and many times you can give a default implementation for the hooks, and if you don't like what is there, you can replace that with your own code from an external source. You got it? So now what happens is, now my yellow portion, the full box is my full software, mind you, right? The yellow with the pink is the full software. But any change that comes, it impacts only the custom code. So typically, when we, and then what happens? So from a testing point of view, you are responsible only for testing your customized code, which is generally a very, 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 very small fraction. So if you're talking about, if I want to associate some percentage to it, if the whole software is 100%, custom code is less than 10%. We've been lines of code, amount of effort, and whatnot, right? So eventually, all I will need to do is deploy and install that small component, which many times can be achieved without bringing the system down. There are technical ways, no? DevOps and all kinds of things. So containerization, we can do that, right? So when we talk about the examples for this, the classic ERP software, they all work on customization. So ERP is not, no, you take SAP products. It is not bespoke software. It is one product which is used throughout the world. How do you think that they make that happen, right? So their core is so strong, and they say everybody must use the same thing. In fact, there is a famous joke, right? So if you are using SAP systems, organizations change their business process to suit SAP. SAP very nicely will say, oh, this is not the way we do it in our organization. SAP will say, no, we have taken the best practices from around the world and incorporated. You can get the benefit of the best practices. They put it very nicely instead of saying, you take it or leave it. They don't say that. They nicely put it saying that this is the best practices that you can also benefit from. So very quietly, we change our business process to fit into SAPs. Right? On top of all of that, if you want to do that, so what they do is they give you lots of hooks that are there. They will refuse to touch their core, and if you're adamant that this is not meeting your requirements, to be fair to them, they have given hooks all over the place. And then you can write your own custom code to hook onto it, right? Which means that, for example, to the extent that they have created a programming language called ABAP. So there's a lot of market demand for that. So people will get trained on SAP, they'll get trained on ABAP, they'll go to join these organizations to create these customizations for individual organizations. So which means that we need to test only the added code, and we have to deploy benefits, high flexibility, very high flexibility. So if you don't like something, you can replace it with your own. I mean, assuming there are only those components which are exposed with the hooks, you can definitely replace. And most of the products will give you enough hooks to be able to do your own thing. And they retain full control on the core, right? So that is excellent. So this also gives you lots of plug and play. So if one custom module doesn't work, you can replace it with some other custom module and so on. The only downside from a practical point of view is that much of the customization has to be written in very vendor specific proprietary programming language. So almost all of them create their own proprietary language. So that is possibly more of an operational downside than anything else, which means the skills that you get, people issues and so on, that is what it is. Okay. The last type of adding flexibility, again, this is extremely popular and very widely practiced, is flexibility through configuration. Okay. So in flexibility through configuration, what happens? There is no custom code. Right? The entire code is written in a way that it is driven by parameters and configurations which come from outside, which means it is not hard coded within the software at all. So you want to change something. Very classic example, the UI screens that are there. So if you are creating an internationalized software, so you code it in such a way that the menu items all appear based on what we call as the language bundle. So there is a locale. So you put it as a EN locale, then all the labels will change to that particular locale. It will, by default, we create it in English. You go and deploy it in some other, so you're in France, then it will all get replaced with French labels without change to the code. No customization also required. So the key difference between customization and configuration is that no coding. In customization, you may still have to code a little bit to create that flexibility. So in fact, you don't even test the software. So use probably specific testing. If you are saying that you'll catch hold of somebody who can speak French, and then they will ask them to go through the screens and say whether the labels are okay or not. It's not the traditional software testing that you have to do. And deploy and install, guess what we will deploy and install? We don't deploy and install the software, we deploy and install configuration files, which are just normal files. We call them as resource bundles and so on, right? So even in your computer, when you go into the locale operating system, you will find there are EN for English, SP for Spanish, FR for French. So all those resource bundles are right there. So in your laptop, when we change the locale from one to another, all the menu items for the entire Windows operating system changes without anything, without no change, no code, no deployment. So that is essentially the benefit of flexibility through configuration. So examples, I said IIT-N is an abbreviation for internationalization. There's supposed to be 18 letters between I and N. L10N is localization. Internationalization is the practice of creating software which is capable of running in international locations. But then to make it work in specific local context, you have to localize it. That is localization. So I create an internationalization software. I take it to France, and then you localize it by adding the local resource bundles. Interestingly, that is one example. Today, the entire IT infrastructure has gone the configuration mode, right? So now, why do you think there is so much interest in DevOps today? So the whole DevOps CI/CD pipeline is all being done through external configuration steps, right? So you want to do containerization, you want to create virtual machines, everything happens through scripts, through specific configuration. What kind of virtual machine do you want? How much of core? How much RAM do you want? How much processor you want? All of that can be done. So what do you do? So here, when you want to change something, you change the external configuration files. That is all there is to it, right? So no code change, no testing. How cool is that, right? So benefits, enormous amount of flexibility. And in fact, if anyone is attempting to create any amount of flexibility in the software, it has to be through configuration. So configuration has to be there, and no coding is needed. Well, I'm biased towards the configuration approach, so we'll take up during Samvaad if you think of any downsides. But I can't think of too many downsides of the configuration-based approach, right? So now let us relate it to the responsible software. So why do we need flexibility in responsible software, right? Because in terms of the need for software to be responsible, that's why I expanded the definition from responsible AI to responsible software. The moment you begin to expand the scope, which means that any run-of-the-mill online transaction processing system, normal, no, your no online e-commerce website to AI system, every software needs to be responsible. So there is enormous amount of variety of software that is available. And then all of this software can be highly context sensitive, right? So what is the, although we saw a good definition of responsible AI, but then it is still a little bit of hand waving, right? So say it is ethical, it should be this, it should be that, right? So it should be, you know, privacy preserving. So we already know that there is no single accepted definition of privacy because each country is having its own privacy laws, right? So which means that we have region specific laws, standards are there, interpretations are there, and so on. So our software needs to be flexible. So just like the way we were taking from one language to another, no, I want to take it from, you know, DPDP compliant software and then suddenly make it GDPR compliant. What does it take? Do I redevelop the software? Maybe not, hopefully not, right? So that is where we want the flexible. So which means the demands are that they are adaptable and perpetually software is always a demand for quick turnaround. I don't think anybody will disagree with that. And another very important thing that is emerging is that it is verifiable. Because now there are many places which they are saying, you prove to me that you are compliant. So how do you show that, right? So how do we do that? So that becomes, so which is kind of related to the explainability aspect as well. So if you are withholding some information, if you are modifying some information, then it has to be explained. So these are the specific demands. So flexibility is of you know, it is definitely a necessary attribute of responsible software. So let's jump into the GRAILS. So wherein we'll try to see how is it that we are trying to bring in the flexibility. So what is GRAILS? As I said, it's a wordplay and guardrail, and because guardrail is something that is very widely used in the context of responsible AI, but I thought it might as well be useful for everything else. So basically, it is a software framework for programmers to develop responsible software. Okay, so which means that it uses the flexibility through configuration approach, wherein the programmers will develop the software as they would normally do, taking the requirements, implementing the requirements, and so on. More specifically, we don't put the burden of understanding these regulations and rules. Okay, so this is where I will need some Samvaad later on, right? So, but the core hypothesis here is that we want the programmers to be blissfully unaware of all those constraints on which they have to operate. So they focus on building software that works, right? And that does functionally what it is supposed to do. So in fact, broadly, when we speak about software requirements, we use two terms. One is called as the functional requirements. Another is called non-functional requirements, also called as quality attributes. Functional requirements is all about functionality. Quality attributes include things that are not pinned to specific functionality. So you talk about performance, scalability, security. These are all cross-cutting quality attributes of software. So flexibility also will fall in that category. So now what happens is when people are developing software, other than a few best practices for avoiding performance problems and things like that, programmers go about doing their job like they would normally do. If I'm developing a Java application, I develop my Java application, I'll develop classes, I will do this, I will do that, without necessarily doing anything explicit, specific to any specific non-functional requirement, including flexibility. responsibility, including responsibility. So they continue to do that. So that is what, so now how does that magic happen? I will show you. Now applications can be built without embedding responsibility rules intrusively into the applications. This is the core architecture principle that we are following here, right? So which is what we are saying. So now when I'm developing a software in the Indian context, if I develop it specific to align with the DPDP, I'll put all the DPDP rules into my software, inside my software, it will work beautifully and great. When I take it out, I have to tear open my software and then replace all the, you can even imagine to the extent of if conditions. If country equal to India, do this, if country equal to Europe, if region equal to Europe, right? So you do so many things, right? So it is not intrusive. So this is all standing separately, okay? And specifically, I also want to point out what is not GRAILS, right? GRAILS is not a ready-to-use library, okay, in the programming sense, right? Which means that in the programming sense, when you talk about libraries, so you can link those libraries and call those functions. Now we talk about all these algorithm libraries, this and that. You kind of, you integrate that, link it into your application, and then you can call them to get things done. GRAILS is not that. GRAILS is not an application, so it is not a standalone application which is solving, which is creating a responsible video creation functionality. No, this is not that. And it is definitely not a product, okay? So let's switch our attention to a little bit on the ethical dimensions. So when we talk about responsible software, so we may want to target a few dimensions of ethics. So ethics in the AI context specifically, talks about privacy, fairness, transparency, inclusivity, accountability, a lot more, okay? So what we did was we just took one aspect of it, which is the privacy aspect of it, and try to explore whether it is even possible to do what we are aiming to do, right? Is it possible to create a flexible software which is non-intrusive and all of the good stuff, whether it is possible or not? So that is what I'm going to be taking up. So this is the big picture of GRAILS that I want to show you. So what happens is, so you have the normal application software. It could be any application software. So the application software want to access the data, okay? So what you do is, so the application software, it could be HRMS, health information system, whatever it is, instead of giving direct access to the data, you put this gatekeeper, which is an external gatekeeper, which is not part of the software, right? So this is a software gatekeeper which is sitting there and says, okay, you want access to this data? Give it to me. Let me take a look at it. So it will take the request, and this is where the guardrail, GRAILS, comes in. So there are two components in this architecture. One is called as the rails, another is called as the guard. So again, a little bit of a wordplay. So rails, I thought, is something which will prevent you from straying outside. So which means there are rules and regulations which constrain your operation. So that is more of a knowledge base that comes in. And the guard is the runtime component which says, okay, this software is supposed to comply with this particular rails, and it says it is a runtime component which will prevent the software from branching out of the rails. So this is the enforcer. You can think of the ethical guard as the enforcer. Again, in my mind, I was thinking like a train guard. Right? So the train guard says, stop here, go there, don't do this, don't do that kind of thing. But then the restriction rails, the rails will give you the boundary in which the guard has to operate, right? And that's what it is. So the restriction rails will tell what are the restriction strategy to apply. I will apply those strategy and give a response. Give a response. What I call as ethically filtered response. So you can easily guess where is that configuration coming from? The configuration is coming from restriction rails, which is way far drawn away from the application software. So what we are saying, you change the rails, the strategy changes, the output changes, right? So that is essentially the broad structure of GRAILS. I will come back to the big picture. So let me take the part by part. So I'm going through the right side. So the configure the rails. Okay, so what are these rails? Now there are, it is elements. One is essentially the rules and regulations, guidelines, and so on. So you talk about the regulatory, the data protection authorities have lots of, the regulators have lots of policies to give and so on. So that is one part of it. And then the second part of it is called as metadata. Metadata also is slightly more abstract. It says that in this domain, if you're dealing with all of this data, the metadata tells you what is the sensitivity level of these various data. So if it is PII, personally identifiable information, it's very clear. But beyond that also, there could be lots of sensitivities that we're dealing with. So that also is made available as a configurable information parameter. And then we have a whole plugin repository of different strategies. So data anonymization strategies, K anonymization, whatever, T closeness, whatever it is, whole encryption, consent management. These are all specific strategies. So what we are saying is these are all of these things you see on the right side serves as inputs, which is detached, right? So these inputs are utilized by the core, the Rails framework. So what it will do, it will receive the request. It will receive the request and it will look at the data that is being asked. It will look at the user who is asking it. So again, inspired by KYC, we introduce the term KYU, know your user. Right? So which is basically some way to profile a user and give a score of trustworthiness. Just like we have score for creditworthiness, we are saying it's a trustworthiness score. That is one input that goes in figuring out who is asking. And then we will look at what they are asking. So what is the sensitivity level, this and that. So that input is also taken. We also take another very important parameter saying what is the purpose for which it is being used. So if you look at the traditional user management, so we use what is known as RBAC, role-based access control. Role-based access control is extremely limited. Role-based access control says it is an all or nothing kind of a format. You say you have this particular role, you have access to this data, right? You have access to all of the data. A little bit of fine grain, you say edit access, read access, and so on, but you don't get into the data item level, right? So broadly, that's what it is. So now here, by taking a combination of what data, what, why, and who. So we form a triplet. We form a triplet there and then say different combinations of this triplet can produce different outputs on the same data. So which means that if you have somebody who's highly trustworthy, possibly I will not do anything. I may not. It depends again. If they are asking for extremely sensitive data, I may still put a spoke because I'll say, why are you asking? Right? The example I could think of is I may be a HR manager who is having a very big role. So I may have access to the individual salaries of all the employees. Just because I have the access, I should not be able to see. So if I am asking somebody's individual salary as an HR manager, the why kicks in and the why says for the purpose of tax reporting, I want this. If not anything, at least there is a track which says that what is the purpose for which this particular access was done, and then the entire access was given. So for the same reason, if the person is saying, no, I just want to know, for example, or some frivolous reason, the system can now react, even if it is HR manager. On paper, you are supposed to have access to the full data. It can say, I will not give you. It will mask the data out. So that's the kind of operation. So all of these things go as input, and then the restriction planner says, okay, I have seen who is asking, I have seen why they are asking, and I have seen what they are asking, and this is the strategy, restriction plan, please go ahead. And then the restriction rails, right? So maybe I will open it up, right? So within the rails, so we talk about the user rails, which is where the KYU I talked about, which is the know your user comes in, and then we have the data rails, and then we have the restriction planner. Let us think about the ethical guard itself, right? So guard is the strategy, which is the engine, which is actually doing. So the strategy engine will take the restriction strategy that it has received based on the what, why, and who, and it will say, okay, you use this particular algorithm for this particular attribute, this is the level of access that is given, for this attribute, this is the level of access given. All of that, it will prepare a specific restriction plan. If you are familiar with DBMS, data query processing, this is equivalent to the query plan. We type an SQL query, it doesn't get executed immediately. So there is a query plan that is getting generated, and the query execution engine takes over. That's exactly what this is. The execution engine is the actual runtime component that returns the data as per the execution plan. And finally, the data itself is the privacy data vault, which kind of holds the data, and we don't expose that outside. So the ethically filtered data, as I mentioned, it's a function, it's a transformation function. So which is the, so for each transformation, we take these 3 parameters, practically, who, why, and what. So those parameters are taken, you will do appropriate transformation to the data, and the union of that, so that is applied, which also means that it is not only not all or nothing, we can apply different restrictions to different data for the same user, right? And for the same purpose also. For the same purpose, you say, for this purpose, I will give you this unencrypted open data because that is what is needed, but for these things you don't need it, I will not give you. So it is possible to do that. So that's essentially the big picture. Right? So what we are saying, so this whole thing is that box that I showed you initially. The request comes in, the system churns out something, and then eventually it gives you what I call as the ethically filtered data. I'll quickly run through the proof of concept, then we can open it up for some discussion. So the data set name that we used is Karnataka at a glance, KG data, which is available in the website, kgis.ks and so on. So the data scope, it contains 30 districts, data about 30 districts, 1200 attributes, covers healthcare, agriculture, economics, and so on. And sensitivity, it does contain lots of sensitive data as well. It contains disaggregated, right? Disaggregated, mostly non-PII, but disaggregated sensitive data, including caste, gender, minority status, disease prevalence, and so on. So, which means that, so how do you deal with this sensitive data right now, if you see, it is all out there. So is it something that we can wrap it around, which can make it more responsible, is what we have tried to figure it out. Yeah, this is for the proof of concept, we created a very simple screen wherein you say who is the user, and what is your organization affiliation, and what is the purpose. We just had a hard-coded list of purposes right now, and you select what data that you want, etc., etc. And so broadly what happens is the system, let me try to zoom a little bit. So using these parameters, it says, okay, what is the data that is asked? So it says, okay, domain, finance and banking is requested. What is the purpose? It is for organizational use. What is the specific data source, which is the CSV file? What attributes are we looking at? Annual income, loan status, monthly expenditure, and so on. And who is it about? It's about adult individual. Because again, when it comes to children, then suddenly the way we handle the data, all those parameters will change. My strategy will change. So we know that no, this is not about children specifically. And we say that the KYU trust score is moderate, and overall sensitivity for the data itself is high, because we are looking at, I don't know, in this example, probably we are looking at annual income and things like that. So eventually we come up with an filtering score, overall filtering 0 to 1. 1 means no filtering, 0 means absolutely nothing is given. So for this kind of combination of the data and so on, there is some amount of 0.4837 is the filtering score that is given. And purely for the sake of demo, right? Now all the annual income data is now replaced with star. Okay, so just for the sake of illustration, obviously the data is not part of the result, but just to show that what it is doing to the data, right? And one additional element we have tried to add is some amount of explanation. So what we did was we took the data and then we mapped it to the DPDP law. And so that document is publicly available. So we said that these are the attributes that this people is asking, somebody is asking, now what is your stand on this one? So it gives this particular, it sees that there is annual income, and this is the guideline that it is given. So this is finance and banking, sensitivity is high and can be shared with credit bureaus or RBI, etc., etc. So all of this is coming from my regulation. So if somebody is questioning why are you not giving this, some amount of explanation that is possible. So that is incorporated into the overall things. Yeah, so this is the cumulative filtering score. So what we do is for each attribute, for each data item, we say this was the original data item, this is what is being given out. So we do a distance measure, some kind of a distance measure between the two, and we cumulative and say this is your overall filtering score across. It just basically it's an averaging. So n into m means there are incidentally for this proof of concept we work with tabular data, not unstructured data at this point in time. So in the tabular data, n into m is essentially the number of cells, which is number of rows multiplied by number of columns. So we just say that on an average, this is the filtering score that you are getting. This is again an illustration which kind of shows that for the same kind of a request, so depending upon my KYU score, if it is low, how the amount of filtering that is done, you can see that almost I don't give any data. So these points are there. See, this particular data point, the data is being given possibly because it is not that sensitive, right? So if you keep going further and further, and so as we become more and more sensitive, the extent of filtering goes very high, almost to the extent saying that I will not give you the full data. So you put a star, 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 and then there is possibly some attribute to some limited level of filtering is being done and it is being given. So this is different combinations of those three parameters. This is the different output that it shows. Okay. Yeah, I think that's pretty much what we have done so far. And yeah, so the idea is to create a non-intrusive platform wherein all these things can be controlled from outside, When I say controlled from outside, it can not only be controlled from outside, it can be configured from outside. That is essentially the idea, so that it will get adapted. It can adapt to different ethical platforms. Limitations, it is, see, basically the KYU computation or the whole mapping of the purpose and things like that, it is done on a lookup basis as of now. Okay, which means we need probably a more intelligent way of doing it. We are still thinking about what is the best way of doing it. In fact, as a case in point, you know, we have been debating very seriously whether we should even use AI for this or not. We don't want to be caught in a situation, chor bane kotwar, right? So we don't want to be use AI to tame AI. I don't know, right? So which is something, but possibly we may have to get to, otherwise how do you characterize the user? It is still up for discussion. Strategy plugin, that's not a big issue. We can add more strategy plugins. At this time, as I said, we have looked at only the privacy part of it, but definitely if this approach holds promise, we will look into other ethical dimensions, and which I doubt to what extent can be configurable or not. For example, you talk about fairness. I don't know, some of it can be done, some of it cannot be done. I suppose now you take inclusivity, for example. So to me, inclusivity, if you're talking about inclusivity across multiple languages, inclusivity across multiple abilities and so on. Now, if I create a software framework and then say that this has to be inclusive from an ability point of view for persons with disabilities, maybe it may be possible to automatically, that resource bundle approach can be taken to create, say, an audio interface for somebody who has got visual impairment and things like that. So that may be possible is what I'm thinking. But not all of it will be possible, or it will be difficult. And of course, we can see that performance characterization, we are nowhere close to doing that, because the request is coming and then lots of wheels are churning and then the result is coming out. So I don't think we can expect any level of an OLTP kind of a performance here. But nevertheless, it might be, the trade-off might still be worthwhile is what I think it is. So what is the overall overarching goal, right? So it is again inspired by security for me. If you look at how security is implemented, cyber security is implemented, right? Gone are the days where I have to hard code every security thing into my application. We don't do that. Application developers, of course, there are a few guidelines called secure coding guidelines. You talk about buffer overflow, this and that, some defensive programming techniques. Other than that, programmer doesn't care. The whole thing sits in an environment, and then you have this big animal called firewall. So firewall is completely non-intrusive, driven by rules, driven by configurable rules. You want to let the traffic through, you do this, all of that can be done without impacting my software. So I'm thinking, can we create an ethical firewall, right? Which is sitting and watching. And more importantly, it is, when it says it is watching, it is not something which will stop something from happening, but it will let things happen in a way which is ethically acceptable. That's where it is slightly different from the security point of view. From the security point of view, if I'm not doing something which is right, it will block me, it will stop me and things like that. So I'm hoping that this is not in that kind. So at the same time, it will not stop the work from getting done. It will keep watching and ensuring that things are being done, which is in a compliant manner. This is the details of the publication, which I just presented in IIIT conference in Spain, Madrid. So the team is Dr. Apurva, who predominantly worked on the proof of concept. She worked as a postdoc. Now she is no longer with IIIT-B. We had an integrated MTech student, Shubham, who created some strategy plugins for us, including K-anonymity and things like that. And Anushka and Janvita are the new research associates who are trying to take this work forward right now. And thanks to Dr. Madhav Rao from the Center for Internet of Ethical Things for funding this particular project, and to Department of IIT-BT, Government of Karnataka. Yep. Correct. I know. Yeah, who checks the configuration? It's a so from as a replacement for the software testing, as I said, so there has to be configuration testing that has to be done, which is true with any configuration settings, isn't it? So when you talk about, that's why I'm saying there's a lot of parallel I see with security and this one, right? So in security also we do so many configuration settings, so we have some method. I think the same methods can be applied. That's what delay, we have not done any performance characterization, but I can tell you it will be nowhere close to the original query performance. Absolutely. So in fact, for the KYU specifically, which I didn't talk about, so we attempted to use fuzzy logic, right? So we say that from a user characteristic point of view, we transform that into some kind of a fuzzy numerical score, and then we use the fuzzification algorithms, which is possibly something that we can use, I suppose. But yeah, that's a good question. So right now, in the POC, we have not. You are right. You are absolutely right that to some extent we seem to have addressed the who part of it with strong authentication, biometric authentication, this and that. So who is fairly okay, right? So the why part of it is still a little ambiguous. How do you even verify that is a big issue. So I would say that until we have much more firm grip on that one, right now we have said it's a list of values. We said these are the approved list of purposes for which you can access any data in that context. So there could be some mapping between the data item and the list of approved purposes for which it can be used. So it is a predefined list and the users have to choose from that. But then how do you even verify that they are allowed to be chosen? We can probably play around with a little bit on the role-based access control to say that this user is having this particular role and they are supposed to use it only for these limited purposes and so on. But that's an excellent question, because all of this, whatever we have been able to do, we have been able to do with structured data, mind you. Right? The moment you get into the unstructured world, it's a different ball game altogether, because although we can easily argue that all these components are valid even for unstructured data, but doing each one of them is going to be a nightmare, right? So you talk about an image generation system. How do you know that it is going to be compliant with all these things and so on? I agree, but as of now, it is a predefined set of purposes. No. So that's where we are saying, at least as a placeholder, we are saying you can make it configurable. So as far as India is concerned, that's why the framework currently is configured to work with DPDP. So tomorrow I replace it with the GDPR. The explanation that you are getting, that you saw, would be different, and the kind of filtering that it has done would be different. So the idea is to be able to adapt. So because there is different interpretations and different limits that are associated with this privacy. Yeah, absolutely. Maybe true. I would use it as my last resort, because to me, the skills needed to build those customizations is a challenge. So here I'm trying to address the broader software engineering community who are not formally trained on any of these things. So that is my only concern, but then it may not be so easy, I agree. So maybe there will be a large software engineering team and there can be a small customization experts who understand this and who know how to code it. So you will engage with them to develop those specific customizations needed, especially for unstructured data. That may be the way to go, but yeah. But if you look at it closely, the reason why I feel even structured data, for structured data, you can possibly agree that configuration based approach will work. We can make it work more or less. Structured data, when you look at the structured data, we have the metadata that you take out the consumer applications, WhatsApp, this and that, ChatGPT and other things, right? Enterprise systems till date, they work on structured data. So to that extent, when you're talking about government applications and things like that, so I think there's still possibility of doing something reasonable in a configuration driven approach for structured data. Again, this is where if you take the larger ecosystem, so if and when this ethical filter comes up, I am expecting it having visibility beyond one application. So one other purpose, no, she was also asking, so how do you verify? So I may give one purpose and use it for some other purpose, right? So when that data comes out of the system, where is it going? If I'm able to watch, right? So today network traffic can be monitored. So if I add a semantic layer on top of it, correct? And then I say that, this we do today for security. Now email. No, I work very closely with Samsung. I work with Samsung students and so on. They cannot do Control-C, Control-V from their email body to external email. Even Control-C is disabled. The moment you do that, you repeatedly do that, mail will go to the manager. So what they have done, so they have created, so what I will do, I will create my ethical filter will be there. So it's a software engineering approach called an ethical agent. So I will install an ethical agent in all the users and watch what they are doing. It's possible because that part of the design is still is standard today. No, you take backup. How does backup work? There's a centralized backup server. Backup agents are running. By the way, when I say agent, I'm not talking about AI agents. That's a different animal altogether. I'm talking about plain simple agents which are running locally, which will facilitate some centralized activity. So that could be one approach. Okay. All right. Just a few minutes beyond 3. So thank you very much for your attention. Hopefully it was worthwhile, your time.